The sky above the mining colony was painted in dusty orange, the kind of color that came when the sun struggled to push its way through heavy clouds of rock dust. Captain Elias Ward sat outside his small cargo ship, a cup of recycled coffee in his hand, staring at the endless horizon. For him, this colony was supposed to be nothing more than a stopover, a place to refuel and trade before heading back into the void. He thought it would be quiet, uneventful, and routine. But fate often had a strange way of changing things when least expected. At first, he thought the sound was just the wind moving through the empty cargo yard. A soft shuffle, almost too light to notice. Elias placed the cup down and listened carefully. There it was again, a faint scurry like small feet on metal. His soldier's instincts, buried but never forgotten, told him someone was watching. He stood slowly and turned toward the shadows near the supply crates. There, half hidden and trembling, were figures, tiny, not taller than his waist. Their large, glowing eyes reflected the light of the landing pad. Elias froze. They were not human children. The small group, no more than 5 or 6, looked like alien girls, thin, delicate, with skin that shimmered faintly under the colony lights, almost like pearl dust. Their faces were sharp yet innocent, their long ears twitching nervously. They huddled together, whispering in a strange language Elias could not fully understand. But the emotion in their voices was clear, fear mixed with desperation. Elias raised his hands slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His voice was calm, gentle, though it still carried the roughness of a man who had seen too many battles. "Hey there," he said. "You don't need to be afraid." The tallest of the group, who looked barely older than the others, stepped forward. Her hands shook as she pointed at him, then back toward the far horizon where the desert stretched endlessly. She spoke, her words broken, but Elias could piece together some meaning. "Please, help. Raiders. Village. Family taken." Elias felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. Raiders. He had heard the rumors during his travels, bands of lawless scavengers who attacked unprotected settlements, stealing resources, enslaving the weak. They were merciless, and colonies like this one were easy prey. The little alien girl stared at him, eyes wide, as if waiting for his answer. He saw tears streaking down their pale cheeks, saw how their small hands clutched one another tightly. Their world had crumbled, and in their darkest hour they had run to the first figure of strength they found. A human. Elias crouched down so his eyes were level with theirs. For a long moment he said nothing. He had left the life of fighting behind years ago. He was just a cargo pilot now, carrying goods from one dusty rock to another. Getting involved in this was dangerous. He could easily be killed and his ship destroyed. But when he looked into the faces of the children, trembling yet still holding on to hope, something inside him stirred. He remembered the oath he once lived by, the belief that strength was meant to protect the innocent. Perhaps he was older now, tired and scarred, but he was still human. And humans, he thought, were not made to walk away when children begged for help. The smallest girl, barely able to speak, stepped forward. In broken words, she whispered, "Take mother. Take father. Please." Her voice cracked and her glowing eyes brimmed with tears. Elias swallowed hard. The coffee he had been drinking earlier now seemed bitter in his memory. He looked at the children once more, then glanced toward his ship. He could leave right now, fly away, and pretend none of this ever happened. Nobody would know. Nobody would blame him, but he would know, and that knowledge would burn in his heart forever. With a slow breath, Elias stood tall again. His voice carried a strength that made the children fall silent. "All right," he said firmly. "I'll help." The words seemed to break through their fear like sunlight cutting through clouds. The little alien girls gasped, then cried out softly in relief. Some hugged each other while the tallest one placed her small hands together in gratitude. They did not fully understand human language, but they understood his promise. Elias bent down and gave a small nod. "But you'll need to show me where. I can't do this alone." The tallest girl quickly nodded and pointed again toward the horizon. Her voice carried more strength now as she repeated, "Village, this way." Elias turned his gaze to the distance. He knew what lay ahead. Danger, violence, and memories of a life he thought he had buried. But he also knew one truth that had never left him. Humans were stubborn. When pushed to walk away, they often chose the harder road instead. And so, With the frightened children following closely, Captain Elias Ward prepared to step back into a world he had tried to leave behind. A world where courage and sacrifice were the only weapons he had left. For the little alien girls, hope had returned the moment they found him. For Elias, a new story was just beginning. The walk back to his ship was quiet. The little alien girls followed Captain Elias Ward closely, their small feet pattering against the dusty ground. Every few steps, one of them would glance back at the horizon, as if afraid the raiders might suddenly appear. Elias noticed the way they stayed close together, almost as if they were one body rather than many, clinging to each other for courage. When they reached the edge of the landing pad, Elias stopped. He looked at his cargo ship, the Vigilant. It was an old freighter, built for hauling supplies, not for battles. He let out a deep breath. Inside, he still had pieces of his old military gear, packed away and forgotten. But using it again meant returning to a life he had tried so hard to leave behind. The tallest of the girls tugged at his sleeve. "You help?" she asked in her broken words. Her glowing eyes searched his face with a mix of fear and hope. Elias crouched down to meet her gaze. "I said I would," he answered gently. "But you have to tell me everything. I need to know what we're up against." The children exchanged nervous looks before slowly explaining. Their words were clumsy, but together they painted a picture. The raiders had come 2 nights ago, descending from the sky in black ships. They had stormed the village, shouting and firing weapons into the air. The adults tried to resist, but the raiders were too strong. Many were taken prisoner and forced to work. Others were kept under guard. Elias clenched his jaw as he listened. He had seen this pattern before. Raiders thrived on fear. They didn't just steal food and resources, they broke spirits. They wanted their victims to believe there was no hope, so they would never fight back. He stood again, looking down at the group. "And how did you escape?" The smallest girl pointed toward the desert. "Hide tunnel. Old water path," she whispered. "We run." Elias nodded slowly. Smart kids. Brave too. He felt a quiet respect for them. But his mind was already moving ahead. If the raiders had ships, then they had numbers. If they had numbers, then charging in alone would be nothing more than suicide. He walked into his ship, motioning for the children to wait near the entrance. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of machine oil. Elias moved to the storage compartment and opened an old metal case. Inside lay pieces of armor scarred from battles long past. His old rifle was there too, still polished, still deadly. He ran a hand across the weapon, memories flooding back of nights under alien skies of comrades who had stood beside him. For a long moment, he just stared at the gear. He had promised himself he would never wear it again. But the faces of the children outside, their trembling voices, left no room for hesitation. He lifted the armor piece by piece, strapping it on. It felt heavier than before, not because of weight, but because of what it meant. When he stepped back outside, the little alien girls gasped softly. His armor gleamed faintly under the colony lights, and his weapon hung across his shoulder. To them, he must have looked like a giant from old legends. Their eyes widened, and for the first time since he met them, he saw something besides fear. He saw trust. Elias knelt down. "Listen carefully," he said. "I can't fight them head-on, not yet. But I have skills and I have tools. If we're smart, we can weaken them, maybe even drive them away." The tallest girl tilted her head. "You won," she said, pointing at him, then holding up her small hands to show many. "Them many," Elias gave a small smile. "Yes, just one. But sometimes one is enough." The girls exchanged glances. They didn't fully understand, but they felt the strength in his words. He asked them to draw the village layout in the dirt. Using small sticks, the children scratched out simple shapes: houses, storage huts, a central square, and the caves where the villagers were kept. They marked the places where the raiders stood guard and showed him a hidden path that led behind the cliffs. Elias studied the map carefully, committing every line to memory. "Good," he said at last. "This will help. I'll need to prepare traps and distractions. If we can confuse them, I can get your families out." The smallest girl tugged at his armor. "You not leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "I won't leave. I gave you my word." As night settled over the colony, Elias began gathering supplies. He pulled old mining tools, fuel cells, and scraps of metal from the ship. The alien girls watched silently, occasionally helping by carrying small items. Though they were young, their determination shone through. They wanted to do something, anything to help. When the work was done, Elias sat at the edge of the landing pad, his rifle across his knees. The children huddled together nearby, finally able to rest for a moment. He watched them, his mind heavy with thoughts. He was just one man with an old set of armor and a freighter that could barely break orbit. Against raiders with ships and weapons, his chances were slim. But then he remembered the look in the children's eyes when he promised to help. That look gave him strength. It reminded him of why humans had always survived, no matter how outnumbered they were. Because when someone cried out for help, a human answered. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. The choice was made. Tomorrow he would act. Morning came slowly to the mining colony. The desert winds carried a dry chill, and the faint sun cast long shadows across the ground. Captain Elias Ward stood at the edge of his ship, staring toward the horizon where the alien girls had said their village was. His armor was ready, his rifle polished, and his mind sharp with focus. The little alien girls stirred awake, their glowing eyes blinking in the pale light. They looked to Elias as if waiting for him to give direction. He motioned for them to come closer and crouched down to meet them at eye level. Today, he said firmly, we prepare. If we go without a plan, we will lose. But if we use our heads, we have a chance. The tallest girl nodded quickly. Though her language was broken, her courage was strong. We show, she said. We help. Elias drew lines in the dirt once again, sketching the village the children had described. They have numbers. I can't fight them all at once, so we'll make them chase shadows. He pointed to the cliffs near the village. Here, we'll set traps. Explosions, noise, confusion. When they scatter, I'll move through the hidden path and reach the cages. That's where your families are, right? The girls nodded, their small faces serious. Good, Elias said. I'll need your help. You know the land better than I do. Show me where I can hide things. Show me where they don't look. The children eagerly agreed. They led him across the desert, moving quickly through rocky outcrops and old tunnels. Elias carried heavy supplies on his back, fuel cells, spare parts, and coils of wire. The girls carried what little they could, proud to play their part. At one point, they crawled through a narrow tunnel that opened onto a ridge overlooking the raider camp. From there, Elias saw the village below. His jaw tightened. Smoke curled from broken homes, and the once peaceful settlement was scarred with signs of violence. Armed figures patrolled lazily, confident in their control. Near the center of the village stood crude cages, and even from a distance, Elias could see faint movements inside. The villagers. The girls crouched beside him, whispering, Mother, Father, there. Their small hands pointed toward the cages, their eyes shining with hope and fear. Elias placed a steady hand on the tallest girl's shoulder. We'll get them out, he whispered. But we need patience. They returned to the ridge and began their work. Using old mining charges, Elias set explosives at narrow points in the cliffs. He rigged them carefully, making sure they would scare and confuse, not collapse the tunnels entirely. He crafted noisemakers from empty canisters, filling them with rocks and attaching them to wires. The girls watched closely, their faces filled with wonder. To them it was like magic, how a human could turn scraps into weapons. One of the younger girls asked softly, You, not afraid? Elias gave a small chuckle. Of course I'm afraid. Only a fool isn't. But fear doesn't stop us, it tells us to fight smarter. By afternoon, the preparations were almost done. The girls had shown him secret paths around the village, small cracks in the rocks, narrow tunnels, and hiding spots that only children could know. Elias marked them all in his mind. Every detail mattered. As the sun dipped low, Elias gathered the girls together. They sat in a circle near a small fire, the wind carrying the smell of smoke across the desert. Elias laid out the plan again, speaking slowly so they could understand. Tonight, he said, I'll strike. When the explosions go off, the raiders will run to check. That's when I'll move. You stay here, hidden. No matter what you hear, do not follow me. Understand? The tallest girl frowned. We want help? Elias shook his head firmly. You've already helped more than you know. But this part is mine to do. If you are caught, the raiders will use you against me. I can't risk that. The girls looked disappointed, but deep down they understood. They nodded reluctantly, agreeing to stay behind. For a while there was silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then one of the smallest girls whispered, "Why? Why you help? You—" "Not us," Elias paused. He stared into the fire, the orange flames reflecting in his eyes. "Because you asked," he said simply. "And because someone has to. That's what being human means." The girls did not fully understand his words, but they felt their weight. To them, Elias was no longer just a stranger. He was something greater, someone who carried hope where there had been none. As the night deepened, Elias stood and checked his gear one last time. He tightened the straps of his armor and loaded his rifle. The alien girls watched in silence, their small hands clasped together in prayer. He gave them a final nod. "Stay quiet, stay safe. When I return, we'll bring your families back." Then, like a shadow, Elias moved into the darkness, disappearing toward the village. The desert wind swallowed his figure, leaving the children huddled together by the fire. Their hearts pounded with both fear and anticipation. They had begged for help, and against all odds, a human had answered. And now, as the night began, the plan was in motion. The desert night was quiet, but every sound seemed amplified. The whisper of wind over sand, the distant howl of a lone creature, the faint clatter of loose rocks underfoot. Captain Elias Ward moved carefully, crouched low, his armor catching the faint light of the stars. Every step brought him closer to the raider camp, and every step reminded him of the stakes. He was only one human, and the raiders were many, but determination burned hotter than fear in his chest. From his vantage point behind a ridge, Elias could see the village below. Fires flickered in broken homes, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Raiders patrolled lazily, confident in their control. The cages in the center of the village were dark, but movement inside betrayed the presence of the villagers. His mission's heart. Elias checked his traps one last time. Explosives were hidden along narrow cliff passages, noisemakers placed strategically to confuse anyone who ventured too close. The little alien girl's guidance had been invaluable. Without their knowledge of secret paths and hidden corners, the plan would have been nearly impossible. Taking a deep breath, Elias triggered the first set of noisemakers. Rocks clattered into metal canisters, echoing across the desert with sudden, sharp sounds. A few raiders spun around, confused, shouting to each other as they tried to find the source. Then the explosives at the cliffs went off, small but bright flashes accompanied by low booms. Dust and sand burst into the air, making the raiders stumble and scatter. Elias didn't wait. Moving swiftly and silently, he slipped through the hidden tunnel the girls had shown him. The shadows wrapped around him like a cloak, and for the first time in years he felt the old thrill of the hunt, the adrenaline of being completely alone in enemy territory. The cages came into view. They were crude constructions built of metal bow, arse and rope, but they held people nonetheless. Families huddled inside, faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Elias's heart clenched at the sight, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would be worse than any enemy. He moved quickly to the locks. Using tools from his pack, he picked the first cage with precise hands, careful not to make unnecessary noise. The lock clicked open and a father looked up in disbelief. His eyes widened when he saw Elias. Who are you?" he whispered. Elias offered a small smile. "Someone who wants to get you out of here." One by one, he opened the cages. The villagers hesitated, unsure if this human could be trusted, but fear outweighed doubt. They followed him quietly, moving as fast as their exhausted legs would allow. Behind them, Elias kept watch, scanning the shadows for any approaching raiders. Suddenly, a shout rang out. One of the raiders had noticed the confusion and was racing toward the cages. Elias's pulse quickened. He raised his rifle, but instead of shooting, he used a flare to create a blinding light. The raider stumbled, shielding his eyes, and Elias pressed forward. The hidden tunnel was close now. He led the villagers through, keeping them low and moving swiftly. They emerged on the far side of the cliffs, away from the raiders' view. Dust rose around them, and the fires from the village flickered like distant stars. The alien girls were waiting near the edge, eyes wide with hope and worry. When the villagers appeared behind Elias, their faces lit up in disbelief and joy. Mothers ran to their children, fathers embraced their families, and the children looked at Elias with awe. The raiders' shouts echoed in the distance, frustrated and confused by the sudden chaos. They had been outsmarted, lured by illusions and clever tricks, and the human had vanished like a shadow before they could react. Elias allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The villagers were safe and the little alien girls were safe. That was all that mattered. But there was no time for celebration yet. He kept everyone moving, guiding them away from the village and toward a hidden path he had scouted earlier. Along the way, the villagers whispered words of thanks. They had never met a human before, and yet here was one who had risked his life for strangers. The alien girl's admiration was clear. They clung to him, calling him protector in their own language, repeating the words with reverence. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only moments, they reached a safe plateau overlooking the village. Below, the raiders were still shouting and searching, but the group was far enough away to be safe. Elias looked around at the exhausted but grateful faces of the villagers and the alien girls. "You did it," one of the girls said softly, awe in her voice. "You, human..." "Strong." Elias knelt, catching his breath. "We did it," he corrected gently. "All of you helped too. You showed me the way. Without you, none of this would have worked." The villagers nodded, smiles breaking through their fear. For them, Elias was more than a human stranger. He was a hero who had shown them that courage and cleverness could overcome even the greatest danger. As dawn began to tint the desert sky with pale pink, Elias looked down at the village below. The raiders had been driven away and the families were free. His heart was heavy with relief and pride. The little alien girls clung to him, and he allowed himself a moment to enjoy their gratitude. This night had tested him, challenged him, and reminded him why humans could never give up, no matter the odds. One man, one human, had faced many enemies and had triumphed, not just with strength but with heart and intelligence. The children's voices rang in his mind, small but strong. Protector, human. And in that moment, Elias realized something he had always known, but now understood more deeply than ever. Sometimes, the smallest acts of courage could shine brighter than the greatest armies. The rescue was complete, but the story of one human standing for the innocent was only beginning. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The village below, once dark and silent under raider control, was now alive with movement. Families emerged from hiding, embracing one another, tears of relief shining in their eyes. Children laughed softly, their small voices carrying across the dusty ground. Captain Elias Ward watched from a safe distance, leaning against his freighter. His armor was dusty, his rifle slung across his back, and exhaustion tugged at his shoulders. Yet his heart felt light. The rescue had been dangerous, but it had worked. The villagers were safe, and the little alien girls who had come to him for help were now smiling and laughing, their fear replaced by hope. The tallest girl ran toward him, her small hands gripping his. "Protector, human," she whispered, a bright smile on her face. Elias chuckled softly, crouching down to her level. "You've got to call me by my name too," he said. "Captain Elias Ward, Protector, yes, but also just a human like any other." The girls giggled, their voices echoing like tiny bells. To them, this human was unlike anyone they had ever met. He had arrived when they were desperate, faced dangers they could not even imagine, and had saved their families. To them, he was more than a stranger. He was a hero. The villagers slowly gathered around, their eyes filled with gratitude. Mothers held their children close, fathers nodded in silent respect, and elders stepped forward with cautious smiles. One elder, a wise-looking woman with silver hair, approached Elias. "You risked your life for us," she said in a soft but firm voice. "We cannot repay you with words alone. How can we honor the human who came to our aid?" Elias shook his head gently. "No reward is needed," he said. "I only did what anyone should do. You would have done the same for another in need, wouldn't you?" The elder smiled, though her eyes glistened. "Perhaps," she admitted, "but not many would face such danger alone. You are different." The little alien girls tugged at his sleeves, leading him toward their families. One by one, they introduced him to parents and siblings he had just rescued. The villagers' eyes were wide with amazement and gratitude. To them, humans had always seemed distant, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening. But now, after seeing Elias's courage, they understood that humans could also be protectors, capable of bravery and kindness beyond measure. As the day wore on, Elias helped the villagers rebuild. He guided them in repairing small shelters, clearing debris, and setting up water supplies. The alien children were eager to assist, following his instructions with energy and enthusiasm. Elias smiled quietly, noticing how quickly they had regained their courage. The fear that had once haunted them was fading, replaced by a sense of safety and hope. The villagers began to share stories of the rescue with each other, each detail making Elias seem larger than life. How a single human had outsmarted many raiders, using clever traps and careful planning. How he had risked himself without hesitation, driven only by the desire to save the innocent. To the children, every story confirmed what they already knew. Humans were capable of greatness. By evening, the desert sky was streaked with stars, and Elias finally allowed himself to rest. He sat near the landing pad, looking out at the village, now alive with laughter and chatter. The little girls sat beside him, their hands in his, looking up at the sky as if searching for the same stars he had once admired in solitude. One of the girls asked softly, "Will you stay?" Elias smiled, shaking his head. "I have to return to my ship, and then to other places in the galaxy. But I will always remember you, and I will always be here if you need help again." The girls nodded, understanding more than words could express. They had never imagined that one human could change so much for them, that someone so different from their kind could bring hope, courage, and safety. They had begged for help, and they had received not just protection but a lesson in bravery, kindness, and the power of one determined soul. As Elias prepared to depart, the villagers gathered to say goodbye. They waved, cheered, and even gave him small gifts. A flower here, a simple handmade charm there. The little alien girls held onto his hands tightly, their eyes shining. "Thank you, human," they said together. "You, our hero." Elias knelt, brushing a strand of hair from the tallest girl's face. "Remember," he said, "being brave doesn't mean you are never afraid. It means you do what is right even when you are afraid. That is what makes anyone a hero." He stood and climbed aboard his freighter. The engines hummed to life, and the landing pad shook slightly with the vibrations. The villagers cheered one last time as the ship lifted into the sky, disappearing toward the horizon. From that day on, stories of the human who saved the village spread across the nearby settlements. To the alien girls, it was a tale they would tell for years, a story of courage, selflessness, and hope. They never imagined that a single human could make such a difference, but they would never forget it. And as Elias soared through the stars, he knew that humanity's greatest power was not weapons or technology, but the ability to stand for the innocent, to fight for hope, and to make a difference when it mattered most. In the hearts of those little alien girls, and in the hearts of all who heard the tale, humans were no longer strangers. They were guardians, protectors, and heroes, and that was more than anyone could have imagined.